Welcome to Ottawa Experts. I'm criminal lawyer Jason Gilbert. Thanks for watching us. Tonight we're focusing on Ottawa's Drug Treatment Court, a specialized court designed for offenders who suffer from a serious drug addiction. We begin tonight's program with a very special interview. Now, judges don't often speak to the media, but Justice Peter Wright of the Ontario Court of Justice sat down with me yesterday for a very rare interview to talk about the Drug Treatment Court. Justice Wright was appointed to the bench in 1993, and he was instrumental in spearheading Ottawa's Drug Treatment Court. Now, because this is a recorded interview, you won't be able to phone in during this portion of the broadcast, but we come back live in the studio and we'll be taking your calls following my conversation with Justice Wright. My guests in studio will be Bridget Luke of the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, Ruth Mayhew, Drug Treatment Court Manager at Rideau Addiction and Family Services, and a very recent addition, thanks to Ruth, Lorna Lemire, who is actually a Drug Treatment Court graduate. So you won't only be hearing about the program from the professionals who deal with it, you'll be hearing about the Drug Treatment Court program from someone who's actually been through it. But first, my interview with the Honourable Justice Peter Wright. Justice Wright, welcome to Ottawa Experts, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Justice Wright, I think it's fair to say that it's rare for Canadian judges to give media interviews, particularly televised interviews. Could you tell us why you decided to give this interview regarding the Drug Treatment Court in front of the camera?
One of the roles of the court is to educate, to explain what we do and why we do it, and typically we would do that in court, in our decisions or rulings. This is an opportunity to explain to the community how Drug Treatment Court works and what it's all about.
And what, along those lines, what is the Drug Treatment Court?
Well, a Drug Treatment Court obviously is a court which supervises the treatment before sentence of addicts who have pled guilty to various types of criminal offenses which are related to their addiction.
And how many drug treatment courts are there in Canada?
By last count, I think there are 14.
And Ottawa Ottawa's Drug Treatment Court was established when?
2006.
Okay. And how does the program work, and what are its objectives?
Well, the individual who is going to participate in the Drug Treatment Court enters a plea of guilty. They appear before the court every week after entering their plea, and the court receives a detailed report from treatment. The expectation of the court, the objective is that the participant will cooperate in receiving treatment, that they will stop using drugs and alcohol, that they will be honest with the court, with the treatment provider, that eventually they will obtain suitable housing, safe housing. They will be in school or working, and they will not reoffend.
And the first drug treatment court in Canada, I believe, having been established in Toronto.
Yes.
That was back in '98. We'd mentioned that Ottawa's was established in '06. Why do you think the drug treatment court programs across Canada have been seen as necessary?
Well, each one of the drug treatment courts are slightly different from the other ones. Drug treatment courts are very much a community-based solution to a community problem. The overall objective of drug treatment court is to provide help to addicts who are committing offenses, to give people another chance. The objective is to try to break the cycle of committing offenses to feed the drug habit. Most of our participants, almost all of our participants, have lengthy records which include very often stints in jail over the course of 10, 15, 20 years. So although drug treatment court doesn't work for everyone, it provides an opportunity for individuals who have been in the system for a number of years and who clearly aren't going to be corrected by going to jail.
And you mentioned a couple of moments ago that it requires a guilty plea.
Yes.
To the individual's charges. An offender can't be found guilty, say, after trial and then apply to drug treatment court as part of their sentence. Is that right?
That's correct. In order to participate in drug treatment court, the accused, the offender, has to accept responsibility and do that by entering a plea of guilty. The reason for that is that drug treatment court is a sentence process. The individual is entering a plea of guilty before sentence. They participate in the drug treatment program, and we're very interested in trying to get participants who are highly motivated to deal with their addiction, and for whom the most important issue is coming to grips with the addiction and hopefully dealing with that.
Now, help our audience understand this. A person is charged with, let's say, breaking into a string of businesses. A person's stolen several $1,000s worth of computer and electronic equipment, and after a police investigation, maybe by way of DNA analysis or fingerprints left behind, the police are led to a particular offender. When he's arrested, he tells police that he's stolen these items to feed his drug habit. And if this person had a lengthy criminal record for similar offenses, he could very well be facing years in prison. He applies to and is accepted to drug treatment court. He pleads guilty, and if he completes the program successfully, what happens?
People who complete the program receive a non-custodial disposition. They will receive a period of probation, and even for the individual who would otherwise be looking at jail, they receive a non-custodial sentence. Drug treatment court is geared towards those individuals who otherwise would be looking at jail. The target group, if I can use that phrase, for drug treatment court are people who've been in the system and in respect of which we have tried other dispositions. We've tried a fine, we've tried probation, we've tried jail. We've probably tried it several times. And the idea here is that for these individuals, jail hasn't worked. Let's try something else. Let's give them an opportunity. Let's give them another chance and see if drug treatment court will help them where maybe jail hasn't.
And how long a program is it?
It's around a year.
Okay.
It's a lengthy program.
If this individual that I used in my example were to plead guilty, enter drug treatment court, what if you were to start the program and then decide after some time in the program that, this just isn't for me?
Sure. It's difficult, I suppose, for individuals to imagine how intensive and how involved the program is going to be. So we have an understanding that if someone starts drug treatment court, we have a 30-day period, the first 30 days following entry, during which the team and the accused can both assess whether this is a good fit or not, whether drug treatment court is going to be a good match for that particular person. At the end of 30 days, if the participant wishes to continue, then they're locked in for the duration. If, however, they decide that they're not happy participating in drug treatment court, then they can strike the plea. They have the option of striking the plea and going back to the regular system. They can take a mulligan.
All right. So a person actually has 30 days to try the program out. If they don't like it, they can actually withdraw their guilty pleas, take their charges to trial if they choose, no questions asked.
That's accurate. And in fact, they don't even have to wait 30 days. After a week, if someone were to say, look, I want out, I don't want to be a participant in a drug treatment court anymore, we would strike the plea and let that person go.
The deadline is 30 days.
The deadline is 30 days.
Right. And then once someone's been in the program for longer than 30 days, if they subsequently withdraw from the program or are expelled, then they're stuck with their guilty pleas. They can't just withdraw them, and they'll simply be sentenced in the normal course. Is that right?
That's accurate.
Okay. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back with more and of our interview with Justice Peter Wright. And stay with us. Thank you. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Jason Gilbert, criminal lawyer, here in the studio with Ontario Court of Justice Judge Peter Wright, talking about the Drug Treatment Court. Thanks again for joining us, and welcome back, Justice Wright. In your experience, have you dealt with offenders who've actually, say, opted for a year in jail rather than committing to that same year in drug treatment court? And why do you think someone would make that choice?
Well, that's a good question. People who spend a lot of time in and out of jail can become comfortable with that. It can be a way of life. It's the familiar, and as a result, going to jail may be seen by a number of individuals as easier than participating in drug treatment court. If you go to jail, nothing is demanded of you. It's just an easier ride. You're just waiting for the time to complete itself. Right.
So this is a long program, and it's a big commitment. Say a participant messes up along the way, fails a urine test, misses some treatment appointments, misses a drug treatment court date. Are there available sanctions other than simple expulsion or just being kicked out of the program?
We have a whole series of incentives as well as sanctions. The preferred approach in drug treatment court is to attempt to be positive and to provide rewards for people who are doing well and who are making accomplishments in their recovery. But unfortunately, there need to be sanctions for individuals who don't show up for treatment, who are dishonest, who miss urine tests, and we have an escalating series of sanctions which begin with a caution. So for someone who has just started in the program, they may not be completely familiar with the expectations, including honesty. We may start off with a caution. The next sanction would be community service, which is the sanction that we use the most. The community service would involve doing hours of work, usually within the next week. So by the return date to court. If a more serious response were felt to be needed, then we have the option of bail revocation, where the participant would be sent back to jail for a day or a few days. And lastly, the most serious sanction would be removal from the program.
Okay, so very much like the criminal sentencing process, a bit of a step principle, a bit of an escalation in consequences.
Generally, yes. Right. We might go from 1 to 3 without dealing with the lower level sanctions in the case of an infraction that was very serious. For example, if someone were caught tampering with a urine sample, either they were bringing in a bottle of urine to the treatment center, or if the urine sample that was being provided was ice cold, and there wasn't some medical explanation, then that would likely be considered as a much more serious sanction than someone missing an appointment or being late for treatment.
Okay. Or probably even than simply slipping up and using.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we don't sanction people for use.
Okay.
If an individual has a slip up, you're an addict, it isn't that easy to deal with addiction problems. And if someone uses and they're honest with treatment in the court about that use, there isn't a sanction. So and that's one of the issues where we often will have confusion with new participants. They assume because this is a drug treatment court, if they use and they tell the court about it, that they're going to be put back in jail or subject to some sort of a sanction. And we're very clear, when people start out in drug treatment court, if they use and they're honest about it, there won't be a sanction.
Are you able to provide any statistics on the success rate of the drug treatment court program? What percentage who are accepted make it through to completion?
We're really very pleased with the success rate that we have in the drug treatment court in Ottawa. At least I don't count success just by people who graduate. There are a lot of individuals who will show marked improvement in many areas, but who might not be able to put together everything that's expected of them to graduate. But we're very pleased with the level of success that we do see. We've noted that for people who get over the first month, the chances of success and of graduation are much higher. If you count the total number of participants who start the program, the success or the graduation rate is much lower than if you simply take out the people who opt out or who are removed from the program during the first 30 days.
So the subsequent 9 or 10 months is a lot easier than the first 1 or 2.
Apparently.
Okay. Which says something just about people suffering with addiction and,
right.
And what it is they're dealing with. After completing the program, which means close to a year in drug treatment court, is there a celebration, a ceremony of some kind?
Yes, we have a ceremony that we call a graduation. The last day for a participant appearing in drug treatment court, when they've met all of the criteria to allow them to graduate, we will call that individual first. Very often the family and friends of the graduate will be invited, people who may have been estranged from their relative or their friend. Sometimes we'll invite the police officer who arrested the individual in the first place. There'll be words at the ceremony by the graduate, by Crown, Duty Counsel, Defense, by treatment. There's a medallion is provided to the individual who is graduating, a framed certificate confirming that they've completed the program. It's a very moving part of drug treatment court. There are often a lot of tears. And could you describe the experience for yourself sitting and participating in a ceremony of this kind? I mean, you mentioned how moving it is, the tears. What goes through your mind when you're seeing someone graduate who on day one started really, I would imagine, at the bottom of the barrel? Jason, you know from your experience as a lawyer that there are very few happy outcomes in the courts because of our adversarial system. One party, at least, sometimes both, will be dissatisfied with the result. The courts can be very interesting, very exciting places, but they rarely result in a great deal of happiness. A drug treatment court graduation is one of those situations where there's a positive outcome for everybody. The Crown, the defense, obviously the participant who's graduating, their family, society as a whole, who are seeing an individual who has been a cost in terms of offenses, in terms of incarcerating them, hopefully on the road to a new beginning. And as a judge, I'm just filled with pride at the efforts of our team, of our treatment providers, and especially for the graduate who has worked so hard to get that far, because it's not easy.
Justice Peter Wright, thank you so much for your time and your insight. This interview has been a truly rare privilege, I know, for our viewers, and certainly for myself as a lawyer. Thank you for helping to bring the drug treatment court to Ottawa as well. It's been a great addition to our system. Thank you. Stay with us. We'll be back. We're back live in the studio. I'm Jason Gilbert, criminal lawyer, and I'm here with Bridget Luke of the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. We will be taking your calls. As I say, we're back on live now, so feel free to phone in with any questions about the drug treatment court, and we'll do our best to field them and answer them. Bridget is with the drug treatment court. She's the current representative from the Public Prosecution Service with the Drug Treatment Court, and I want to welcome her to the show now. Thanks for joining us, Bridget.
Thanks for inviting me, Jason.
How long have you been with the Public Prosecution Service now?
Since 2007.
And how did you get involved with the Drug Treatment Court?
Well, actually, I was asked whether or not I would be prepared to take on that assignment, which is usually only a one-year assignment in that drug treatment court as the federal Crown's representative, and I have been there now for 3 years.
And is that because no one else has wanted to do it, or you just love doing it?
I think it's a bit of a combination of both. It's a very challenging role. It does take you out of potentially long-term project work in our office, but it is also a very rewarding job, and so I enjoy it very much.
The application process for the drug treatment court, that's something that I didn't so much get into with Justice Wright during our interview, because the Crown, if I could put it this way, is kind of the gatekeeper to the drug treatment court. Am I right? In other words, the Crown decides who gets in and who doesn't, at least at the initial stage. Is that fair to say?
Right. Well, I am one of two Crown attorneys, actually, who is assigned to the court. I represent the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, which is commonly known as the Federal Crown Prosecutor. There is also a representative from the Ottawa Crown Attorney's Office, who is commonly called the Provincial Crown Prosecutor.
And that's a completely independent office of yours.
That's right. And we basically have a screening function with respect to the individuals who make application to the court based on the charges that they're facing. If the charges are within the Federal Crown's jurisdiction to prosecute, then I would undertake those screening functions, and as it would be for the Provincial Crown, if the Provincial Crown has carriage of those offenses.
And so if this was someone, if this was an offender over whose offenses you had carriage,
Yes.
You were responsible for deciding whether or not they're accepted, what would make somebody eligible to be considered for drug treatment court versus ineligible?
Right. I think that the first thing that is important to remember is that the application comes from the accused person themselves, and that involves, I think, a conversation with their own legal representative, and that would be you as the defense counsel, as to whether or not they are truly motivated to enter a program such as this. And as we've already discussed, a program which contemplates an intense period of treatment rather than going to jail potentially. And so that conversation is completely separate and apart from the Crown prosecutor function. And hopefully what happens is the applicant is coming to the court of their own free will, essentially, to access the treatment option rather than be considered for a jail sentence. The applicant needs to plead guilty, first and foremost, as you had discussed with Justice Wright. So it's a post-plea process that the drug treatment court involves. And the types of individuals that we're typically seeing as applicants in our program are offenders who are actively addicted to a hard drug. And under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, each of the drugs are scheduled, and these are typically under the first schedule, Schedule 1 drugs, which are hard drugs such as crack cocaine, heroin, and opiates such as oxycodone.
All right. So it could be a Schedule 1 sort of hard drug, as you've described it, on its own, crack cocaine, powder cocaine, heroin, an opiate. It could be that, or a combination of a hard drug and another substance, a softer drug, if you will, such as marijuana or alcohol, but there has to at least be a Schedule 1 hard drug substance as an aspect of the addiction.
That's right.
Okay, so alcohol on its own, marijuana on its own wouldn't be, someone who suffered from such an addiction alone wouldn't be eligible for drug treatment court.
Not typically, no, yes.
All right. And you mentioned you heard Justice Wright talk a little bit about the sanctions that are imposed in drug treatment court. Now, this is a long program.
Yes.
Anywhere from 9 to 12 months. And you touched on it, and in terms of the severity of the charges, and Justice Wright touched on it a little bit. And I'll certainly tell you, this will give you a little bit of an eye into the types of conversations that a defense lawyer and his client might have in the lawyer's office, which is that, and Justice Wright touched on it, as I said, unless it's something that's going to potentially result in a significant jail sentence, drug treatment court wouldn't normally be recommended for someone. Did I understand that correctly?
I think that's one way to look at it. I think that an individual who's looking at potentially short jail sentence might think that that is an easier way to an eventual release than completing the minimum 9 months, which is required in our drug treatment court program.
Right. And so that often is part of the conversation or part of the decision-making process. I mean, I got a client in my office who's saying, I'm only looking at a stint of 30 to 60 days for what it is I'm facing. Why am I going to, make a commitment and risk, 9 to 12 months in drug treatment court when I could be out after, 40 days with the 2/3, 1/3 parole eligibility on a 60-day stint? These are very much the practical realities of the decisions that our clients often have to make in consultation with advice from their lawyer. But if it's an individual who is serious about kicking a habit and kicking an addiction and wants treatment, I imagine that if that person only were facing, say, 3 or 4 months in jail, if they were to simply plead out and get sentenced, but were willing to put in the time in drug treatment court of, say, a 9 or 12-month commitment, would that not demonstrate maybe an even greater level of commitment, or make you even more encouraged that maybe this is someone who you ought to take a chance on?
Yes, absolutely. And if that motivation is there, Jason, there needs to be some jail sentence potentially in that person's future should they plead guilty, but I have had experiences with participants who were only facing 60 to 90 days jail sentences, and they choose specifically to involve themselves in this program exactly for the reasons that you just mentioned, because they recognize that their addiction is really taking over their lives, and really what we're looking at are offenders who are really motivated to criminal acts because of their addiction. Typical offenses such as property offenses or drug trafficking offenses at the street level, those are offenses of opportunity that allow them to access money quickly so that they can feed their habit. So at some point, I think they recognize that they want to break out of that cycle.
And in terms of sanctions, if somebody were to mess up, not show up for a treatment appointment, miss a urine sample, lie about use, say that they haven't used when in fact it's clear that they have based on the results of a urinalysis or something along those lines, what sort of sanctions would you as a Crown prosecutor ask for? What sort of penalty?
Well, I think there's a range of sanctions. I believe Justice Wright touched on this, which start at the very lowest end, which would include a warning and a clear message of what directions need to be followed in the program. And that ranges right up to the most serious sanctions, which are a revocation of their bail, which lands them back in jail for a period of time up to 8 days. And the reason why it's an 8-day bail revocation maximum is because the court sits every week on Tuesdays, and that would constitute bail revocation from one Tuesday to the next.
Now, Bridget, you heard Justice Wright talk about the difference between the experience of presiding over drug treatment court versus the traditional adversarial or the traditional court process where it's, the state against the accused. And, you've been doing this for 3 years. I mean, drug treatment court, I know you've been a lawyer for a lot longer than 3 years, but you've been the drug treatment court Crown for the Federal Prosecution Service for 3 years now. But before all that, you were trained to be a Crown prosecutor. And so you're trained to sort of, go into court to get the bad guys. And now all of a sudden, you're there kind of in a different role. I mean, you're still prosecuting the case, but do you feel differently about your role as a prosecutor in drug treatment court versus when you're trying a case, litigating a case in front of a judge with a defense lawyer and an accused person on the other side of the courtroom, and you're trying to prove your case against that person?
Sure. First, let me say that it's not simply to get the bad guys that the Crown function exists. It's really to present the evidence that may or may not lead to a conviction, and it's not a conviction at all costs, absolutely, on behalf of the Crown. But it is definitely a different hat that I wear in the drug treatment court, in that because it's a post-plea process.
You were well prepared for this interview.
We're looking at all mitigating factors, and someone's commitment to a treatment program and their ability to acknowledge that their criminality may be based in an addiction is very important, and it does have significance in assessing what an appropriate disposition would be. So the focus is really much more on that individual's circumstances and that potential for rehabilitation. And in regular court, I guess, or in mainstream sentencing, it's always a balancing act. But really, in the drug treatment court, there is an absolute focus on that individual's personal situation and rehabilitation. And if there is that potential for rehabilitation, that's absolutely what the Crown and every other member of the multidisciplinary team is striving for.
Well, let me say this. Certainly in drug treatment court versus if you're prosecuting a case in the normal course, I would imagine that in the drug treatment court, the accused is humanized for you to a degree that he or she is not in a typical adversarial criminal trial, where usually you don't even really you almost don't notice that the accused is there, I imagine. You just see the lawyer on the other side of the courtroom and the judge in front of you, or the jury in the courtroom if it's a jury trial. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think the reality is that when you're dealing with high volume cases going through the courts, it's not always possible to discover all of the personal circumstances of that particular offender. It would be great if we had more information to consider, but it's not always possible. In the drug treatment court, the team has access to extensive information from the treatment providers and from other service providers involved with that person that you typically would not have access to. And I think that and you would know this from your discussions with potential participants, they agree to that in order to really put all the cards on the table to maximize their potential success in the program. And I think that full disclosure really is a different aspect of this court.
Tell me how watching a drug treatment court graduation ceremony unfold feels for you.
Well, at those ceremonies, the crowns do get to say a few words about the participant, and those are always great moments for me. It's like no other time in court, really. And a crown in the drug treatment court, I would say, pretty much lives for those days, because those are the best days. And all I can offer is my congratulations and words of encouragement for them to stay out of the court system in the future and to recognize the significant achievement it is to overcome an addiction, which for some of these participants have been lifelong, at least in their adult life.
As always, Bridget, you've been a great sport. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
No problem.
Bridget Luke of the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. We'll be right back with Ruth Mayhew of Rideauwood Addiction and Family Services and Lorna Lemire, a drug treatment court graduate. Stay with us. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts, everybody. I'm Jason Gilbert, criminal lawyer. With me in studio to talk about a little more about the drug treatment court is Ruth Mayhew, who's the drug treatment court manager with Rideauwood Addiction and Family Services. And sitting next to her is Lorna Lemire, who actually graduated from the drug treatment court program. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Lorna, when did you graduate from the program?
November 27th of last year.
Okay. And you had been in it for approximately how long?
364 days.
Okay. What were you? What charges were you facing before entering drug treatment court?
I had been arrested for possession with the proceeds and trafficking.
Okay. And do you have do you recall more or less what type and what quantity, what amount of drugs we were talking about in terms of the trafficking?
Very much so.
Okay.
It was a 60 piece. It was just
Okay.
$60 in street value, and it was to an undercover police officer.
Okay. And so just so our viewers who may not be as familiar with the lingo as I am as a criminal lawyer, a 60 piece, we're talking about 0.6 grams.
Yes.
Of the substance of a substance, and I take it you're talking about crack cocaine.
Yes.
Like rock.
Yeah.
Crack. Okay. It's important, I think, to point out, because I realize we didn't touch on it perhaps as I should have in the last segment. Violent offenses are typically ineligible for drug treatment court. Also, if it's a trafficking offense, in other words, if somebody's dealing or selling drugs in rather large quantities, or what we would call a commercial drug trafficker, that would be, again, typically someone, I would think, that would be screened out of drug treatment court. I think it's fair to say in Lorna's case that the type of drug trafficking that you were convicted of is very, very, very typical of an addict who is selling a portion of her own crack cocaine to carry herself through her next fix.
Exactly.
Am I right about that?
Yes.
Okay. And Ruth, is this quite typical of the clientele that are involved in the drug treatment court with Rideau Wood?
Yes, yes. Hand-to-hand trafficking, small amounts. The Crown does an excellent job at screening out the dealers that make money.
Sometimes too good
drugs.
a job from the defense lawyer's standpoint, but
Perhaps. So it is typical what Lorna has described in terms of the trafficking charges.
Okay. And Lorna, was it only crack cocaine that you were addicted to, or were there other substances as well?
It started off with marijuana.
Okay.
Very quickly became a crack addiction. Not a good idea to start dating a crack dealer, but yeah, very quickly became crack. And when it started into crack, that was the only thing I was doing after that.
And how old are you now, if you don't mind my asking?
37.
I would never have guessed. And how old were you when you started using drugs?
The first time I ever got high was 14.
Okay. And then it would have only been at the point of your stint in drug treatment court that you became clean.
I had on
Periods
and off.
of-
Yeah, I had periods of clean time during those 20 some odd years, but
But we're talking overall about a 20 some odd year period of a severe addiction.
yes.
And even now, I take it that part of the treatment or part of therapy is the understanding that once an addict, always an addict.
Yes.
That you continue to deal with that, but you take things one day at a time.
Minute by minute at times.
And what are you doing with yourself now?
Right now, I do a lot of volunteer work, a lot of service work with the 12-step fellowship that I'm involved with. Takes up a lot of my time.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I'm currently unemployed, just because I'm dealing with some other issues that I need to stabilize before I get back into the workforce.
And the offenses that you mentioned you were dealing with that led you to drug treatment court, the hand-to-hand trafficking offense and the proceeds. And by the way, again, when you mention proceeds, you're simply talking about the $60 that you accepted from the undercover cop, which was proceeds of crime,
right.
is what they call it. Was that your first time in conflict with the law, or had you had charges that you've dealt with and were sentenced to in the normal course previously?
I was still in the course of dealing with some charges that I had in Quebec when I was arrested for that.
All right. And Ruth, I'd like to ask you, and I think our viewers would be very curious about this, what is a typical day in treatment? I mean, someone in the drug treatment court, we've heard it's approximately a one-year program. How much time does that person actually spend in treatment?
On average, the short answer is about 5 hours a day.
5 hours a day?
Monday to Friday.
Okay.
For the first 3 or 4 months. And a portion of that also includes the court piece on Tuesdays.
So it's almost a full-time job for someone in the program.
And yes, it is. And that's typically what we say to people is, this is your job for the next 3 to 4 months. So, and to encourage people to treat it that way. So to get up and get a routine, to start coming in at a specific time, to...
It's not easy.
It's a very onerous program on the individual.
Were you, Lorna, were you overwhelmed? Were you daunted by that initially? I mean, the way Ruth makes it sound, it's as though you're taking on, you know, mountain climbing or something. Is that what it felt like?
Yeah, very much so. From going from living minute to minute, not knowing where you're going to sleep, not knowing, you know, where you're going to eat next, to having a routine and it being stable is very life-changing.
Did you have permanent housing at that time?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so that makes it, I guess, a little bit easier than, say, living in a shelter or while you're dealing with that. And the 5 hours a day Ruth, in treatment or counseling for the first 3 or 4 months. This is at the Rita Wood Center, which is on Parkdale?
Yes.
Okay.
At the Parkdale site.
And what types of programming does that 5-hour day consist of?
It consists of an individual coming in for 9:30 in the morning and attending a group which starts at 10:15 till about noon, about a 2-hour group. And then in the afternoon, they have lunch at the center, and in the afternoon there's a group and or meeting with their counselor as well. And most people do meet with their counselor every day, just in terms of checking in how they are, and also to take care of any mini crises, obstacles.
Lorna, at what point in your time in drug treatment court did it become clear to you that that was where you wanted to be? Because I can only imagine that at the beginning you were probably, petrified.
Yeah, that's to say it politely. I think it really hit home with me when I woke up after a relapse. I was in jail on the Quebec side, and I ended up having to go back to the Parkdale site and check in with one of the counselors that was there, and it really hit home that day that I had everything to lose.
And this was about after how long in the drug treatment court program?
5 months, something.
So about
Was it? I can tell you the exact date. It was in April of 2012, and I had started in November of 2011. So.
Okay, and then you would have completed it in November of 2012.
Yes.
Okay, and for those 20 some odd years prior to entering drug treatment court, suffering with addiction, what was life like for you?
I had a pretty normal life until I started doing crack.
And when did you start specifically doing crack?
The first time I ever did it, and my parents are watching, so I was 16. I had done it for roughly about a year, stopped, got pregnant, raised my son, dabbled in it a little bit over the years, but it was about 2 years prior to my starting at Rita Wood that I was heavily into it.
And you just have the one son?
Yes.
And how old is he now?
He'll be 19 this week.
And did you raise him all the way through?
Until that crack addiction kicked in.
Okay.
So until he was about 15 or 16.
All right. How did you find the day at Rita Wood during drug treatment court? Did you find it very intensive? Did you find it exhausting? Was it, did it take a lot out of you?
At first, yes. Having to get up, I'm not a morning person, so having to get up, I live in Orleans, and to get to Parkdale by bus was an exhausting trip in itself.
That was part of the sentence, was just to travel to and from.
Right. And I wasn't allowed to drive. That was one of the conditions of my bail conditions, was not to drive. So I ended up having to take a bus, and it was an hour-long bus ride. And there was many times, I have to go past the Rito Center on my way there, so there was many times that I had to fight to stay on the bus because I just wanted to get off and go get high. And then I'd have the full day there. And at the end of the day, I'd say a good 90% of the time fell asleep on the bus ride home because I was so exhausted. It's a mental exhaustion, not quite a physical. But it was very overwhelming at first.
And did you find, were you intimidated by things like the urine samples, the testing? Were you concerned by that, or did you kind of just go with the flow and accept things as they happen?
The only time I got concerned about a urinalysis is when I had used, and I knew that it was going to come back. And I tried to pull the wool over their eyes and tell them, no, it wasn't me, I was, I was in a room with somebody. But that was, other than that, I don't have that guilty conscience because I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong to warrant a positive test result on my urinalysis. So.
And Ruth, you mentioned for the first 3 or 4 months it's 5 hours a day. What happens after the first 3 or 4 months?
A person would move into the second phase, or what we call phase 2. And during phase 2, they are developing a plan of living in terms of volunteering, education, working, and moving slowly into that phase and acclimatizing themselves to, as Lorna was mentioning, getting up every morning, going to either treatment or a volunteer position or even work. And people look forward to doing that, to getting to phase 2. And people have to meet a certain criteria, and that is being in the program for a minimum of 3 to 4 months and staying clean as well in order to move it through the phase into phase 2.
Lorna, what did it feel like to graduate from the program?
It was overwhelming. My graduation actually ended up falling on my son's 18th birthday. Miss Luke, who was here earlier, had mentioned to me, and it still rings in my head, that she had mentioned me in a speech that she had given a week before, that I had celebrated my first birthday in over 20 years, and I had celebrated it clean. There was no alcohol involved, there was no drugs involved in my birthday. There was a lot of tears.
Were family members of yours there?
Both my parents, my son,
who had turned 18 that day?
Yeah, that day, and his pregnant girlfriend were all there. One of the best memories I have of my graduation is when the judge asked my parents if they would support me, and my father said to his to his dying breath that he would support me in my recovery. So I get choked up thinking about it.
Lauren, I want to congratulate you not only for completing the program, but for going on the air and sharing your story with us, with our viewers. Your candor, your openness is something that I know I appreciate, I know our viewers appreciate, and I'm sure that the organizers of the Drug Treatment Court appreciate it too, because you're a testament to the success of the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth Mayhew, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you
for having us on.
I'm Jason Gilbert, criminal lawyer, Ottawa experts. We were looking at the Drug Treatment Court tonight. If you have any questions for me, you can send me an email, jason@abgottawa.com. Good night.